Being competitive in the business world is a lot different today. In fact, it's different every day. Can you keep up with the change? We'll help. This is the PowerApps Academy Podcast. We'll talk about anything and everything Microsoft Power Apps. Finally, you can reach capabilities that were once only reserved for high-end development tools. And with our help, you'll quickly become a pro. Let's do it. Welcome to the PowerApps Academy Podcast. And now your hosts, Barry Abramson and Darren Neese.
Hey, Barry, we're live. We're back.
Hey, yeah, it's good to be back, Darren. So glad to have you back. And looking well. You're looking well.
Thank you. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, I've had one big medical issue. That's something called diverticulitis. Had no idea what that was before. I do now. I don't recommend it. I would rate it a 0 out of 5 stars. Wouldn't recommend it.
Oh, but glad that you're feeling better, for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
It sounds like you've been through war zone, to be honest. But great to have you back. I missed having our sessions, so it's good to be back.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely. So what do you have in mind this week to cover?
So I thought it'd be great to cover off components, and we've also had a little bit of a rethink, because Darren's been a bit unwell. We're going to try a new format. We're going to try and stick to 30 minutes and keep focused on a topic. And what we thought would be a good topic for today is to talk about the old component. Hopefully you guys know what components are, but so it's a great component to add to any app is just a header for your app. So Darren, what's your view on components?
Yeah. So in any application, there are quite a few things that you want to reuse between your screens. So the first thing that comes to mind is a menu. But even before creating a menu, something that you had actually mentioned is having some type of a header component, which is a great place to start because we don't have to implement some type of a gallery for the menu items and all that type of stuff. Maybe we'll cover that in a future session, how to actually create a navigational component. I think I initially put it in the title or the description for this one, so I'll need to go in and modify the title and description. So if you see that, what we're going to do is just cover the basics of components, and then either the next or some future session soon we'll talk about the navigational stuff. But so in like a app header at the top, the things that you might want to have up there. First of all, you want to have the title up there. What other things can you think of that we might want up there in the header component for the app?
Well, what I usually put in is who's logged onto the app, because it's always great to see, right? As maybe some nice UI to your app is if you can see who's logged on. So a little image of the image that's in Active Directory might show, and you can actually turn that from a square image, which doesn't look great. You can format that into a circle image. You might just have, this is the currently logged on user and their name or email address, perhaps your logo, and some other useful information that you can put on there. A quick question, Darren. So what kind of things work within a component and what doesn't? Because I think you can have buttons in there, but you wouldn't be able to reuse other elements of an app in there. It's quite restricted, isn't it? It's not like a screen where you could.
Yeah, there are some. I wasn't. I know there are some limitations. I can't rattle off all the limitations off the top of my head, but I don't think you can put another component, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know that to be true, but I've never tried it. Like, say I create one component and try to throw it into another component. I haven't tried that. I'm thinking that may not be possible. But perhaps a quick something that we can revisit in another session where I sort of research it, make sure I have a good list to give you.
Well, I think what I've tried to do is, I've tried to use elements of other screens and components, and it is sort of its own isolated element. So you can't really use lots of other elements within your app within the component. It's basic. You can maybe set buttons as long as you can navigate to screens, but just think of it as just a header and an isolated component that will show on all your on all your screens, but there are some limitations to it. So, but I think just what we're going to be using it for is just putting some useful information and then putting it on top of your screen so you can use it in your app. So it's always a useful one for everyone who's developing an app. We want a nice UI. Let's put a component on top of our screen. So that's what we're going to be doing today.
Yeah. So when you think of components, think, do I want to reuse this, or do I want to have this thing on multiple screens? Will this save me time? If maybe I could just set a few properties and I can do something different on different screens. So one example would be in this header component, we could actually, there's an app object within PowerApps we can reference, say app.activescreen.name. So on each screen, it will actually pull in the active screen's name. And so that would be dynamically pulled in. It wouldn't be exactly the same on each screen, of course. But just think of reusability, even though if something might change here and there. So it actually, I'm very used to the concept of components because I had it in the 20 years of software development experience where you have object-oriented programming where you create a class that represents some type of an object. So if I need to have something in my code that represents something I want to manage, like customer data, I might create a customer class, and the customer class might have a first name, last name, that type of thing. But then going to components or UI components like we have here in PowerApps, all this object-oriented methodology, you're adding the UI elements to it. So I always think about what are you going to be using from screen to screen, also from app to app. We could create what's called a component library and actually import it into 15 different apps. So you don't have to recreate this component. Did you know about that feature?
That's great. I've never actually used that, but that would be. Are we going to do that as a part of today's, or are we going to visit that later?
You know what? We could actually do that. It does make it. There's upsides and downsides to creating a component library. One of the downsides to making a component library, it makes things a little more complicated, harder to debug, but of course it's much more reusable. So if you're working at an organization, let's say you've got a nice menu that you built, well, you want to put that into 15 or 50 different applications. You really want that in a component library, especially if other people are writing Power Apps like, hey, I don't want to write my own menu. Let me pull in from put it in a component library so I can pull in from it. So if you want to reuse it between apps, you definitely want to create a component library. The only thing is if you make a change in your component and it's in a component library, you have to save, you have to republish, then you have to go back over to your app. And what I've noticed I have to do is close down that app, reopen it. Then it gives you the possibility of re-importing that new version. Right. So it makes the whole debugging process a little slower. What I'd recommend for our case, especially since we're trying to shrink down our sessions to closer to 30 minutes, I think it might complicate this session.
Yeah,
however,
we
could cover that component library concept perhaps in its own little session.
Sounds good.
So just to sort of recap where we've been. So this is episode 5 of our podcast. So in the first 4 episodes, the first was I think it was just us talking about you and me and what we were doing. The second, third, and fourth, we were pretty much building this app. Let me bring this up here so everybody can see it. So what we have here is we have a single screen. We have a single data source that we created, and it's a contact type of database table. We've got title, which is their full name. We have phone, email, birth date, and country. And that's it. Okay. Going back over to our application here, we have a form that allows us to add a record, edit a record. Of course, we've got buttons down here that do either a submit form or it's a submit form, whether it's a new record or an edit. The new button uses that new form function that tells the form, hey, this is a new record. We have a delete, so we learn how to do delete. Of course, you see the remove function here in PowerApps. That's actually a deletion. You're actually deleting it in the data source. So that's what we're doing on the right side of the screen that we built out. The left side, we have a very basic gallery. And then above that, I believe we did this in the last 2 episodes. We sort of worked on sorting, filtering, searching, all that type of stuff. And that's pretty much what we've done in the last 4 episodes. So this one, we're going to add on components. So
if you guys haven't actually watched that, go back and watch it because there's some really great beginner stuff on some core concepts and Power Apps around forms and the basics of forms and galleries. So if you haven't watched that, certainly go back.
Absolutely. And what Barry and I have been talking about is we want to start the very beginning, which I believe is what we did. That second episode, we were going really nice and slow and just talking about the basics. Maybe we did a little bit of that in the first episode as well. But we want to do things in a very linear way. And at some point, we want to do a little bit of a deep dive or have a whole episode on variables. So that's sort of basic type of things. So we don't want to get too complicated too quick. We want to make sure we cover all the basics. So we're going to be watching the comments during this session, all of our sessions. Make sure you guys have any questions, comments as we go along. So we should.
And also, if there's anything you want us to focus on sooner rather than later, also put it in the comments, and we'll make sure that. As I said, we trying to reduce these to 30 minutes. So if there's something that you guys want us to focus on the next session, then we can certainly look at doing that for you guys.
Absolutely. All right. So this is our one screen application. And let's go. If you look over here in the tree view in the upper left corner, we got the tree view that allows us to see all of our screens and all the controls in those screens. There's little two tabs, screens and components. So I'm going to click on components, and it's blank. We have no components so far. So what we're going to do is click on new component. Okay. And that should give us a little blank canvas here, which is fine. Now, the first step is probably to give this a meaningful name. I always give my components a prefix of COMP, short for component. Yep. And then I like to give it some type of a meaningful name. So in this case, I would say app header. Okay, so it's been renamed now. And what I'm going to do here
Darren,
is
just a quick one. It may be a silly question, but is the size of the component, is it exactly the same real estate in terms of screen size as a screen? So it could cover your whole screen.
It's not. So if you look at the size over here on the right side, it says a width of 640 and a height of 640. So if I go back over to my screen right now, and I hit Control-0, which will size it down exactly. Now I'm going to click on plus. I'm just going to bring over this component directly to the screen and just see what we get right now as it sits. So we click on that plus screen on that menu, the navigational menu on the left side of the screen here. I'm trying to be very verbally descriptive because I know a lot of our watchers / listeners are actually just listening to the audio podcast. So I like to be very descriptive here. As we go down there, you got all these different controls, the popular controls like label, form, that type of thing. The first little grouping we have here is something called custom. So I'm going to expand that and look at that. It's got our comp app header right there. So I'm going to click on that and it's going to bring it over.
And don't forget that, guys, because I've added components before and then I haven't used it for a while and I've got like, well, where do you add it in again? So just remember, go to the plus sign, custom, and then your component will be under there.
Absolutely. And they've changed the UI over time. There is another way of doing it that I used to do. Now this is like the better way that I've learned how to do it. Mm-hmm. Also, if you're trying to bring in a component library that we were talking about just a few minutes ago, you go down to the very bottom, it says get more components. And then you could go select that component library if there's something else out there in that environment. Also, so if you go to insert, there's a little thing over here called custom. And look at this. You can import a component. Now, I believe you can actually import a component from another project, which is very helpful. You can export your components. And there also used to be something here where you could say, and maybe that's part of this import also from component libraries as well. So, and that's changed.
And that'll be great, Darren. Because you can keep all your branding. So you could develop a component that's got all your coloring, your logo, your fonts and everything, and then just have that ready to import into your app and reuse to save you a whole heap of time.
Absolutely. It's a great idea. All right, so we have this component over here. It's selected. I'm going to go back over to the tree view and see what's selected here. And I'm a little perplexed because our component is a white rectangle. Okay, so we can see the border of this because we've got these little handles here on the edge. Okay, but I'm going to go back over to my component and I expect it to be white. Now if I click on fill, look at this, so it's actually transparent. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, Barry, I'm going to ask you to give me some ideas for branding colors for what we're going to create here. Do you like colors? Do you
Oh
like
gosh, asking me for colors. Yeah, my favorite color is purple. I mean, we could go for
purple?
purple.
Okay. And what I have
And
found always looks good on like a app header is a darker version of whatever you're trying to work with. So let me see if there's a dark purple, and there's not. So what I'm going to
is
say is
magenta a color? Sure it is.
magenta. Isn't that like a blue? Oh, that's a purple.
Oh well, dark. Try the dark one.
Dark. Oh, I like that.
That's quite nice.
And what you can do, you can take any color and make it either lighter or darker. You know this by using a function called color fade. And you think a fade would fade it, and it does, but you get a negative number, you can make it darker. If I say color fade, I take that color, and the second parameter here, I say 25%. Negative,
nice,
and it's going to be a little darker. How do you like that? So we're almost at the PowerApps purple color there, aren't we? You like that?
That is good. I do like that color.
Now, if I go over to screen, now we've got a nice purple rectangle. It's not quite what we were going for the screen header, but at least we see the effects of all of our efforts here, right? So I'm going to go back over to components, and the first thing that I want to do is I want to make this a lot shorter. So for the height, I'm going to say 200, maybe 160. So we can fit a few things in there. For the width, there is a way to tie into the design surface of whatever this component is going to be thrown into. Okay. And I believe what that is, we can tie into app dot this design width. Look at that.
Right.
Isn't that cool?
Didn't know that.
I'm going to control zero to typically that will zoom out. There we go. I'm going to go to screens. Okay, now look at what we have. I'm going to hit control zero again here. So now I can, oh, look, that's perfect now. But of course we have a problem, which is we need to sort of size this other stuff down and make room for it all, right? That might be, well, no, we need more. So one of the things I don't like about a form is it just becomes this big blocky thing. Of course, we can make it smaller and get a scroll bar. But if I had created this not using a form and just controls, I could have saved a lot of space there. We can do little things inside the form.
So getting your screen real estate right and the layout of your app is really key. You don't want to cram everything in and have an untidy app. You want to really think about usability when creating your app. So just sketch it out beforehand how you want it to look. Always helps.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with that. A tool that I like to use to sort of wireframe out my screens is something called Balsamic. In fact, if I do a search here for wireframing and I'll say Balsamic, there we go. That's what we're looking for. And this is what I use. And there's two versions of it. Now, in my course that I sell to build a ticketing system, I actually have a whole like hour or 2 hour session where I do a lot of wireframing using this tool. So if you want more of a deep dive, you can go there. But there's two versions. There's a cloud version where you pay like $10 a month, or there's some cost every month, or you can buy the desktop version you install, let's say on Windows, or perhaps, I don't know if they have a Mac version, but you pay a one-time cost, which is what I did. And you have unlimited views, but you can see the type of example there. It looks really nice, and it's very clear as you mock something up and show a users. Okay, so this isn't something that's functional. This is just an idea. Because if you mock things up in PowerApps and then you send them a screenshot like, "Oh, cool, you're done. Cool. When can we start using this?" No, no, that's not yet.
And also another point on that branding is just keep all your apps with a similar brand, right? So come up with a branded interface, and then try and mold all the different kinds of apps you have into the same interface so that it's the same look and feel within your organization. It's not like each app has a totally different look and feel. So try and build that branding out with all your apps.
Yeah, I agree with that. Absolutely. Whenever I build an app for an organization or my employer, I'm always striving for consistency and make everything look like it belongs and that they know they're in the right spot. If if I'm building an app for a company and I'm not using the colors and the logo, like, oh, where am I? Am I being spoofed? Did I get sent a link from some hacker? Should I be clicking on this? They start to have those thoughts. So the consistency, not only they get a little bit of assurance, but it looks nice, and managers and everybody's happy that everything is consistent with the branding. So,
so Darren, I've just seen the clock. It's ticking on 20 minutes.
Yep.
I think we're
Time
talking
flies.
too much.
Time flies. It does.
It does.
And we really haven't done anything much with this component yet. Of course, I did need to size this down. Otherwise, this stuff isn't going to fit. And eventually, we'll put a little component here for the menu. But you know what? This is starting to look like a real app now as you start to add these things. So let's go over this component. All right. So Barry, what's the first thing that you want to add to this component?
I think let's put the image in. So we want to pull the image. Don't we need a connector for that? Or do we put the
what type of image would you like? Is this their profile image, or is this the company logo?
No. I think let's start with the profile image, because that's
okay.
That's
you like to put that on the right side of the screen?
Yeah, I like to put on the right side, and then if we get the connector for the Office 365 connector, we can use the image that is stored in Office 365 for that user. When they open the app, it'll show their
now,
own pictures.
Barry, what are your thoughts on? So I have this image controller over here. If I just go to image, and I just use the user function and I say .image. What are your thoughts on that? Do you still like to use the Office 365?
Who's that handsome guy over there? That's just appeared.
Wow,
that is a handsome dude.
This was years ago, and also my buddy down here in Florida, he is a professional photographer. So I think he made me look a little better than what I really was, to be honest, just to be fair. But that is
very good.
Probably about 10 years ago. So now we don't have to use the user.image. I have no problem pulling in the Office 365 users, but this is so simple to use. And what I found 95, maybe 98% of the time, working for large organizations, this photo that's pulled in by user.image is almost always exactly the same thing that's pulled in from the Office 365 users.
Okay, now let's go with that. I mean, I have a line of code that I just copy and paste, and that uses the Office 365 users, but yours is a lot more simple to use. So let's go with yours.
Okay, very good. And something I like to do, especially if we want to make this a circle, we want to make sure that the width and height on this thing is exactly the same. So I'm going to say maybe 140 by 140, and perhaps we'll just try to put that right in the middle there. Okay, there we go. Now, did you say you wanted it to be more of a circle?
Yeah, it'd be great if it was round, because a square photo is pretty old school. So it'd be cool if that was,
I would agree. Radius. It almost looked like it was built in the 90s or something.
1980.
Okay, so I'm going to click on this image, and I'm going to go find this border radius. And you don't want to put a static number in there. What you want to do is click on, especially if you have an exact square, is we want to say self.height. This isn't looking quite right here, because there's actually 4 different border radiuses, and it only has a single border radius. What I want to do here is if you bring down those drop down, you got the right top left, you have the radius top right. I'm going to paste that there. Okay. Then we're going to say radius bottom right and radius bottom left. And now we've got a good circle. Now, an added touch that I like to do here is I like to give it a nice solid border, maybe 4 pixels, maybe 2, but put a little white thing there. It could be black, or you could use some other accent color from your company's branding colors from your style guide. You could do that as well. Do you like how that looks? Is there anything else that we need to change?
I do like that. And I think, is there a comment? Is there a comment? I think there is.
A comment? Oh, awesome. Yes, thank you. Let's bring this up. Anish, thanks for commenting here. Hey, Darren, could you elaborate on the point when you said that if a screenshot goes out from the canvas view, it may not portray the real view and the app goes live? Might be a silly doubt, but I am just curious. What was I saying? Canvas view.
Could you elaborate, Anish? I'm not 100% sure.
And
Elaborate.
Nicole's listening along here. She says, I agree. So either Nicole or Anish, preferably Anish. Can you elaborate on what I was talking about? Barry, do you know what I was saying?
I can't recall. I can't link anything to what he's saying, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Could you elaborate on the point where you said that if a screenshot goes out from the canvas view, it might not portray the real view when the app goes live?
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Unfortunately,
I do remember one of my students in my course, and maybe it was Anish, or maybe you saw my comment, where a student was having this deal where their canvas view while they're dealing with a component was like off the screen, like it was. I don't know if I can move this down. Sometimes, have you ever had that, Barry? You creating a component and this canvas area, the designer is like almost off the screen down in there. Anish, I don't know if that's what you're talking about. And what I said was, well, make sure you zoom out, and maybe that might fix it. Okay, so here he did comment here, like when you were adjusting the width of the component according to the screen width. Okay, so yeah, so if we set design width, now what we had before, it was like just a square here in the middle, and then we adjusted the width. So it was starting here and it would have gone off the canvas. Okay, so maybe that's what he taught. And then I readjusted, and as you can see here, the component has an X and Y of 0, 0. Okay. So perhaps that's what's going on. So yeah, you either adjust that.
Yeah. So your width was just a go back to what was the command you put in for the width? Design width. So that basically defaulted to the width of your app, right? Your screen real estate. You could also just put in a value in there, right, as well. So you could have done it either way.
Absolutely. So this is the default value. Whatever you set over here in the component, okay, for the width, you set it up. And if I go over here, let's see if this is true. Can I go in here and set this to be 500? And it can. Okay, so I'm gonna hit Control Z to.
But you could also drag it, right? If you put 500, could you just drag it if you didn't know what the width was?
So I could do that. Absolutely, I could absolutely drag it.
Yeah.
Okay, but something I want to mention that I think maybe Ashish is hinting at, like if this was, because it's exactly that width, I can't move it over anymore. But let's say we had a menu, a left navigational side menu on the left side of our screen there, and it went down, and I wanted the screen header to be to the right side of that menu. Okay, so what I would want to do here is I would want to subtract how much ever width I wanted that menu to be. So maybe I've got 100 pixels for that that menu to be here. And in that case, I would probably reference that component's width. Something else that we could do is, let's say, like before, I'm going to go over here and just sort of elaborate on this and say, let's just make this 500. Okay. And let's say we always wanted it to be 500. Okay. So that means this should default to that. Okay. What we could do here to override it is we could say app.design width, but then we could subtract self.x. So that's another thing that you can do. So do you find that helpful at all, Barry and or Anish? And he just commented here. That's precisely what I want to know. Thanks so much. Oh, you're very welcome. All right, so we need to keep moving, Barry. We're at 29 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna set that to be design height, and I want this to be, and typically that's what I do with my headers is I like to take up the full width there, but as you can see, you've got other options that you can do there. Okay. All right, so there we've got that. What else are we gonna put in here? Probably a big label for the text of the application. Okay, let's make that white, and let's make it big. Okay, I'm watching for comments from my wife Nicole to say, no, don't design it like she's very big on typography and colors and all kinds of design stuff.
What sort of font do you normally go with? I normally just stick with the Open Sans.
Do you know what I normally go with? And it makes Nicole cringe, and some people like, ooh, I don't like it. I sort of like it. It's this dancing script. I like it. I'm gonna say,
Go for the posh one, right?
yeah, we'll say application, and it doesn't look at all application uh, name here. Okay. Off, there we go. And maybe we'll make this to like 64, nice big. Now, if you don't like my dancing script, a lot of times Nicole will talk me out of that. A lot of people do like Arial. I think Arial just looks really basic, but it's sometimes basic is good. Now, what do you think of that? Is that too big?
A little bit, maybe, because we're going to put the name.
Yeah, let's go maybe 50 or 42. Yeah, maybe we want to put some other things in here, like the screen name. Okay. All right, so we'll put that there. Typically, I like to put an image here for the logo for the company. Now, in that case, what we'll want to do is go over to multimedia and upload a nice image and just set it to that. Okay. I think right now I'm just going to leave it. Probably everybody knows how to upload. Now I shouldn't assume, but run a little bit low on time here. So multimedia, you would click on upload, pick the image, and then set it. See this little drop down here, and set that image to whatever you uploaded. And it's as simple as that, really. Okay. So we've got the name of the app. I'm going to make that a little smaller there. I'm going to add in I'm going to copy and paste that. Could you give me a color that would look good with purple, but isn't white, that would still have good contrast?
Oh my gosh.
Maybe yellow or pink, or what
gray.
would look good here?
Light gray,
okay.
Very light gray.
Yeah, let's do that. I'll click on color here, and let's just type light gray. There is a light gray. Is that
not great, but it's okay for now? We'll come back and visit the color later.
Okay, very good. All right, so what I want to do here is instead of having application name here, I want the current screen to be displayed there. So I'm going to reference the app object, and the app object has an active screen property, and then I'll say it has another property. The active screen is an object itself, and we'll reference the name. Okay, now in the component view, there's nothing there. Okay, so what I like to do is I like to say if is blank. Okay, I need to put that parenthesis there. If it is blank, I'll say screen name here. Otherwise, I'm going to use that app active screen name right here. And there we go. That seems to work fine. And let me make it a little less wide for both of them. Now, maybe the screen name, I probably want that to be more like a 32, something a little smaller. Okay. Now, I think I remember you saying you also like to have like a name and an email address there. Would you like to add those as well?
Yeah. So maybe just a label with logged on user, and then we can just put the display name.
Yeah. How does yellow look? Do you like yellow in this case, or maybe like a neon green or something?
It's hard to find. This needs to be a light color.
Yeah, typically when you do an app, you want whatever organization you're doing this for, you're working for, you need to go to their department, their marketing department, and say, hey, I would like a style guide. And the marketing department should absolutely know exactly what you're talking about when you say style guide. It will have a document, typically a PDF, that will be between 3 and 20, maybe 50 pages, depending upon how serious the organization takes their style guide. And it'll have all the fonts that you should be using, all of the colors that you should and should not be using, even the images. And get all that stuff from there. Otherwise, you just, I don't know, if you're trying to create something for a very small company, typically you go out to their website and all that, you just try to go with whatever theme they're trying to go with, and or even just ask them, hey, what colors do you like? All right, so this first label for this text, I'm going to use that user function again. User, and the user function gives us 3 things: the name, the email, and the image. And the image we've already used.
And I noticed that you text align that to the right, so that it's
yeah. So if they have a long name, let's say we got a good label here, it would look weird if it was right here beside the application. Sometimes the application name can get a little long, or the name can be really long. I want to do everything I can do with to keep them from overlapping each other and looking a little cluttered or little not so great. And I'm going to make the font color maybe something like 20. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I want to copy and paste that label. And for the second one, I'm going to modify this to bring in the email. Okay. So they have no confusion as to who the system thinks that they are. Some people might share a computer at the office. So they might want to know who they're logged in as, because when they edit records, we're tracking who is making those changes to the database. And that is, there could be an audit trail of that. So they will know, oh, if I make this change, people are going to know it was me that made this change, which may or may not be important. Now, what are your thoughts? This is not a bad header component. Do you agree? Is there anything that needs to be
I think that's
here?
great. People also like to look at themselves. So I get
absolutely.
It's nice to see a picture of themselves and then log in. They're like, oh yeah, man, I'm good looking. So I think that looks good. We'll find an image off screen to upload that as our logo, and so
maybe we'll put a PowerApps Academy podcast logo or something there.
That's a good, grand idea.
Now, in order to sort of fully put this thing to use and see its effect here, why would we create a component just for one screen? Well, let's create another screen. Okay, blank. Now, there's one of two things you need. You go back over to the plus and add this header component here. You could do that. Now, we really didn't have the chance to cover this, Barry, and which is over on components. We could create custom properties. Okay. So if you wanted a component to be, let's say your app needs to pass in values to the component and to do something differently based on that property, that change in that property, perhaps we can cover that in the next session. But that's as you build a more and more complex component, you really need to be doing that. There is an alternative to that where you don't have to create properties to make things more dynamic in the component. If you are here on this component, go to the right side of the screen and look at this, Access App Scope. If you turn that on, this component here inside this project can access all the global variables that you're using in the app.
Do you remember I said earlier that I couldn't access some of the variables within my component? You just solved that problem. Well, thank you. It's a big takeaway I'm taking away from the session. Well,
awesome. And by what my memory is, that wasn't always there. That they're always changing PowerApps. They're always changing things up, keeping me on my toes here. And sometimes if you watch an older video, I say things like, only one person can be in PowerApps at a time. Well, you know what? They just announced, they announced it late last year that they were releasing a co-authoring feature. So two developers can be in at the same time.
That's fantastic.
But it was really sort of like they said it was an experimental feature, and it really was. And they said that. They're like, there's different types of experimental features. Some are pretty baked in, and you're definitely going to get what you see here. Some are very experimental where things can change a lot. They just announced at the Orlando conference, 2 weeks ago, that they are releasing it as a final type of feature here in the near future. I noticed today I was in PowerApps and I could right click on a thing here and say comment. I could leave a comment on this component. Have you seen that?
No, that's
something I just noticed today. They're always throwing new stuff in there. Now that was part of this co-authoring thing here. So perhaps it's already in here. Okay. But let me stay on point here. I digress, right? So I created a second screen here. Now, right now they don't have, if this is running, there's no way for me to get back to that previous screen. So it really sort of begs the need for that menu, right? So I go back to this screen. So a lot of times if I set up a lot of property, let's say I have a bunch of custom properties for this component and they're all set and I want them to be set on all the other screens, what I'll do is I'll hit Control-C on this component on the screen. I'll create a new screen. And when this fresh new screen comes up, I'll hit paste. That's typically what I do. So those are two ways you can bring in that component there.
Yeah, and then it just creates a new component, right? A copy of the old one. Yeah.
With whatever things. So, well, Let me give you a really quick example here. And what we'll say is, get that out of there. Create a new component. Let's create a all this extra text. Okay, that's going to be a property of our component. So then that's the display name, extra text. The name is going to take that little space out, and for the description is just some extra text to display. Okay, and there's a property type. Most of the time, it's going to be input, and I don't want to go into output. It's a way for this component to give your application information. Okay, I'm not going to go into that now. It's a little more intermediate / advanced. And the data type is just going to be text. We could have all kinds of different property types. We're going to leave it as text. We just want to keep things simple right now. Now, I'm going to click on the create button, and it's going to be there. Now, what I'm going to do for this screen there, I'm going to display the name of the screen. Okay. And then I'm also going to add in a space. And then I'm going to use this comp app header, which is the name of our component right now. I'll say dot extra text. Okay. Now, if I go here, I click on the component, I click on extra text, the text, extra text on the right side of the screen. Do you see what it says here? It just says text. I'm going to make that just blank. Okay. I want that to be the default. I go back over to the application here on screen 1. And I'm going to say for extra text, I'm going to say 1111. Okay, there we go. Over on screen 2, I'm going to make extra text be 2222. Okay, 3. I'm going to click on the component and give it 3. So we know that, okay, so the property value for the 3 separate instances of our component have 3 different values in its properties, right? Now, let me show you something that will sort of drive home the point that I was trying to make a few moments ago. I'm going to create a new screen. Now, instead of if I just bring this over with this plus sign and say, there's my component, you see there's nothing. So it just says screen 4. It doesn't say 404. And this is just a blank screen. So it's not really add anything there. Okay. Now, I'm going to delete that out. I'm going to go back to the tree view. I'm going to go back to the screen 1, and I'm going to copy this component on the screen 1 that has this extra text already set. I'm going to go back over to screen 4. I'm going to paste it. Look, it's got the 4 ones. So does that sort of drive home what's good about having a property there? It will default to certain things. It can be set. They can be different on different screens. I can add multiple versions of the same component on the same screen. So say 2. And I could bring another one on here. So you can drop the same component that would have different values being passed into it here. And as you can see,
to clarify, is that each time you create a copy of the component, it's a copy. It's not the same component, right? It's a copy of the component.
If you create, so in the programming world, we use different because it gets confusing. Okay. Do you know how, like, if you're in construction, you got a blueprint for the house. The blueprint is not the house; it's a blueprint. Okay, and the house is an instance of that blueprint. Does that make sense? The use of the word instance. Okay, so in the programming world, and I think about it in the same way here in PowerApps, because they're already implementing all these object-oriented things, but we're not calling them object-oriented. In this instance, in the object-oriented world, whenever you say the word class, you're talking about the blueprint. A class is a definition. If we go over to the tree view and click on components, this is a component, but really what it is, it's a blueprint. It's not really real. It's just a definition of what something will be in the future when it's added to a screen. When it's added to a screen, it's called an object. And sometimes people will use the word class and object interchangeably. But in the real world, because it's all virtual, it's all electrons anyway, right? In the real world, you don't really confuse blueprint with house. Okay, so over here in PowerApps, what we have is we're bringing over instances of the component class. Now, each object in memory, so you see here, I've got 3 objects here in memory, okay? And they could have their own values. And now the only thing that can have its own value is this one property that we created called extra text. It could have the same values. or it could have a copy of the same things, So this second one and this third one I brought over, but or I could copy it. So I could copy this 1111. That was a copy of that instance. So things can get a little complicated. So if you bring it over from the side, and just bring it over, it's going to have whatever we set up as the default. And I'm going to delete some of these here. Okay.
Yeah.
And
so just so I understand it, the component is the template, and then you create lots of copies of that, and you can apply as many copies as you want to whatever screen so you want.
Yeah. So the component itself is the definition. The component itself is a definition. It's a class. But when you add it to a screen, it's actually an object or a UI component running in memory here in the application.
Yeah. Cool. All right, got it. Fantastic. All right. Well, there's a level of detail to components now, right? That we didn't know.
There's actually quite a bit there. Yeah. There's a lot of stuff we can dig into. Do want to make sure that we keep up with our comments here. Anish says, is that functionality of co-authoring through GitHub? The one that they talked about last year was you either had to connect to GitHub, or you could also connect to Azure DevOps for the Git repository. And that's how it sort of synchronized all the co-authoring. Now, the new co-authoring feature, I don't know enough about it yet because of my medical issues and catching up and doing all this. I really haven't had the time to really delve into that. So I don't know, so I can't really say. But perhaps before our next episode, Barry, you and I can sort of read up on that, because that's a pretty big feature and a feature that a lot of people will be interested in, including myself.
Yeah, if we could demo it next time, if it's available, that'd be great. Do a quick
yeah, absolutely.
view on that.
And when they release new features, it usually comes out as experimental, or so we go into settings. Let's just check this out just really quick here. So look at this, debug published app. So automatically create environment variables. So these are features that are there that you can turn on, but then you've got upcoming features. Okay, so you got preview. Let's see if it's actually in here. There for a long time, the Git repository, it was probably be over in experimental, to be honest. Okay, there's experimental. Just go down here really quick. Look at that. Show the Git version control setting. Okay. And then there's some features they're trying to. So I don't really feel prepared to sort of delve into that now. It's something they just announced. So, and he says, "Hey, that helps, Darren. Thanks. Yeah, you're welcome. I wish I could have been more helpful, though." All right, Barry. So what do you think of where we're at right now?
Cool.
I think it's a good stopping point, or
no? I think that was a great. Yeah. I think that's a good stopping point. And so next session we're going to continue with the menu, right? And how to create a menu for your app.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Great. All right, we'll look forward to that one.
Yeah, I got one thing to say, which is,
hey, if you're getting anything helpful out of this, a comment or even a like really helps the channel, and lets people like you know this is good content. Much appreciated.
Anything else you'd like to say before we go?
No, all good. Just visit PowerAppify.com.
Yeah, absolutely. PowerAppify.com. It's right there at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So there's lots of forms coming for HR related apps in there, and that's ready for download. Will be in the next week or so.
Awesome. That's glad to hear.
Cool. All right.
Glad to hear that. Yeah. All right, very good. And we will see you guys next time.
Guys, for some reason, YouTube thinks you're going to like this video next. Let's see if they're right. Or you can select this playlist, which I've selected for you based on the content you're currently watching. Guys, got to hurry. Click one of them. Otherwise, YouTube's going to autoplay some other video, which you probably don't want. Thanks.